Hey everybody, it's Aaron from Got a Minute. Brother Aaron coming at ya with another theory, another thought here, but thought I'd talk openly first, and then I'd get into some charts and details and graphs, and switch the camera around, right? And then do a conclusive statement. I'm talking with new people, I'm talking with mature, studied people, big mix of people watching these videos, so I kind of want to accommodate everybody here. So here's my thought, here's my introductory stuff without charts, just talk openly to you, and then we'll get analytical, and then we'll summarize it. Okay, so open thoughts. Moses wrote Psalm 90. I think it's the only psalm that he wrote, and I think it's the oldest psalm in the Bible. It's talking about 70 to 80 years, then we fly away. I've talked about how I think that the fig tree generation could point to the midpoint of tribulation. And if we're going to go with the 1948 date, which is the most recognized date of when Israel became a nation, 1948 plus 80 years, 2028 would be the cutoff for the 80 years, right? And so my two scenarios I like the most, I've said this a lot, is either a midpoint on Hanukkah or a midpoint on Passover. So we're going to talk about those two scenarios. And if we even take the latter one, the Passover 2028 as the midpoint, you subtract 1,260 days, that gets you to the fall of 2024. So that would be kind of like the latest that this theory can be used and tested. So I like this theory a lot, but I also like how this theory is going to be tested pretty quickly with, minusing 7 years and having a midpoint in 2027 or 2028. And so we're going to talk about Psalm 90, how it was written by Moses. It was also likely written right in his last year. We'll talk about that. I'll show you some Bible verses as to why I think that's the case. And that's it. So let's get analytical now. I'll switch the camera around, and then I'll summarize my thoughts. Don't get lost when I talk about all these charts and graphs and everything like that. Okay, let's flip it around. Okay, so we're outside. We got our charts out here. Okay, so we got this cool picture here in Moses. He was 80 years old when he took Israel out of Egypt, and at the halfway point, Israel will be 80 years old if we're going with 1948. Perfect typology. So let's go through these verses over here, and we'll pull the charts as we need them. And so Acts 7, verse 29, we can see how Moses was 80. I put some pencils in my Bible just so I can get to these things a little quicker. And if you want, you can read all of Acts 7. But if you go to verse 29, you can see, then at this time Moses fled and became a dweller in the land of Midian, where he had 2 sons. And when 40 years had passed, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire in a bush in the wilderness of Mount Sinai. Let my people go. Okay, so essentially he was 40 when he left Egypt. He was 80 when he went back. And we know that he was 120 when he died. It says this at the end of verse 36 there. He brought them out after he had shown wonders and signs in the land of Egypt and in the Red Sea and in the wilderness for 40 years. If we go to Deuteronomy, we see at the end of Deuteronomy, it tells us that he died at 120 years old. That's Moses. So his life was divided in 3. 40 years he took off, 80 years he came back to release them, and 120 he died. So that's the life of Moses. But the big deal is he brought them to the wilderness at the age of 80. Okay. So here's the interesting thing. Let me read, before I go and show you this other chart, let me read now the amplified version of Psalm 90. Okay. And just, let me show you one thing here that's really actually pretty incredible. Psalm 90 it's really, the whole psalm is talking, there's a lot of judgment sounding things in here. In fact, if we read from verse 7, I'll do that, but I really want to highlight verse 9, the verse before verse 10. And so verse 7 goes, for we have been consumed by your anger, okay, and by your wrath we have been terrified. And you have placed our wickedness before you, our secret sins which we tried to conceal, you have placed in the revealing light of your presence. For all our days pass away in your wrath. Okay, so there's lots of wrath and anger and punishment. But this verse, for all our days pass away in your wrath, we have finished our years like a whispered sigh. And the Amplified points us back to Numbers 14, 26 through 35. And that's the chapter that God said, you know what? Because of your rebellion, you guys are going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, a day for a year, right? So if we're reading this translation correct, and most translations write it like this, actually, as if Moses is writing at the end of the 40 years. So in other words, it's almost like this verse is saying this: for all our days have passed away in your wrath. We have finished our 40 years, like a whispered sigh. Man, these 40 years have been tough, but it's up now. So this psalm, if this is correct, and then again, this is, I think, is a prophetic thing, Psalm 90 verse 10 and on. I believe it's a very prophetic psalm. It's the only psalm that Moses read, and it's the oldest psalm in the Bible. And I think that Moses wrote this in his 120th year. It would have been the last things he wrote, and he's like, our 40 years is up. Okay, so if that's true, then if you look at this chart over here, now this chart is just a rough timeline, but we see, according to this chart, this is the first Passover, 1446. Now, some people would say 1447. Some people would say 1448. Let's go with the middle one for now, 1447. That means they would have crossed the Jordan in 1407. So my assumption is that Moses would have wrote this psalm in 1407. Okay, so that's what I wrote here. It's possible that he wrote this in 1407. So that's 490 cycles, 7 cycles of 490 years to 2024. Okay. 7 years after this date, Israel, their land gets divided, and they receive their promised land. Caleb inherits his land. 7 years after this date, they cross Jordan, and then there's 7 years. You can go through Joshua 14 and Deuteronomy chapter 2 to verify that. But Moses says the Psalm 90 verse 90, Psalm 90, likely in his last year, his 120th year, 40 years after he brought them out when he was age 80. Isn't that so cool? Now, in Exodus 14, you know how he parts the water, and Moses takes them out on Passover. Okay, so that's the Moses stuff over there. Let's go over here and check out some other thoughts that I've had. All right. So Moses, is he one of the witnesses? Very, very possible. A lot of people think so. Okay. So Psalm 90 verse 5. What does Psalm 90 verse 5 say? I'll get my Bible out again. And, I don't have a pencil on here. So we'll just get there real quick here. And it's talking about a flood in Psalm 90 verse 5. I could use my Amplified there, but that's okay. You carry them away like a flood. Daniel 9:26 talks about that, about a flood. But also Revelation 12 verse 14 through 16 talks about that. So let's go read that. I have it on my thing here. And before I go there, actually, let's read Psalm 91 verse 3 and 4. So we got a flood reference, and we have the psalm after it, which was not written by Moses. Funny enough, verse 3 and 4 says, surely he shall deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the perilous pestilence. He shall cover you with his feathers, and under his wings ye shall take refuge. So we've got feathers and rescue over here, and we've got flood over here in Psalm 90 verse 5. Okay, now we're going to go over to Revelation 12. Hope you're tracking with me, and I'll summarize this again at the end. But Revelation 12, 14 through 16, we have, this is the midpoint, but the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle. Okay, we just read about being protected like a bird, right? And a fowler is somebody who tries to catch a bird specifically, and that's in Psalm 91, right? So, but the woman was given wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for times and half a time, for the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman. There's the flood, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. So we've got flood and wings right in Revelation at the halfway point, and we have flood and wings in Psalm 90. I lost my spot again. We got flood and wings in Psalm 90 once again. Okay, so Psalm 90 verse 5 and Psalm 91 verse 3 and 4, we got flood and we got wings. And then we have flood and wings in Revelation 12, right at the halfway point where we would expect it. And Psalm 90 verse 10, before I read Psalm 90 verse 10, let me read Matthew 24, midpoint, and pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. That's why I like Hanukkah quite a bit. Abomination of desolation, that's when, Antiochus Epiphanes put up his abomination of desolation. Pray that your flight may not be in winter. When we go and read that psalm once again, Psalm 90 verse 10, that's where we tie the 70 and 80 years to that flight. And here, I'm getting it. Okay. For it is soon cut off and we fly away. There's your flight analogy. But we got the feathers over here, and we got the flood over here. That connects with Revelation 12, 14 through 16. I read Matthew 24, verse 10. And then 2 more verses to show here, and this is John chapter 5. And Jesus is rebuking them because they didn't recognize what Moses was saying. For if you believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? And so, when did Moses write about Jesus? Well, he wrote about Jesus in Deuteronomy 18. And so he was a witness to Jesus before Jesus even showed up. He was already a witness. Deuteronomy 18, 15 through 18, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren, him you shall hear, according to all you desire of the Lord your God in Horeb in the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, nor let me see this great fire any more, lest I die. And the Lord said to me, what have they spoken is good. What they have spoken is good, and I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren. This is talking about Christ, the Messiah. So that's what Moses was speaking about. So Moses was a witness about Christ, and Jesus said, Moses spoke about me. And of course, there's Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration. Another hint that these 2 guys could be the 2 witnesses, not sure. But there was all my graphs, and here, I'll show you something else again. I don't know if I should put this in the video just yet. I don't think I did. So if Moses wrote this Psalm 90 verse, just Psalm 90, he probably wrote it in 1407 BC. Well, that would point to 2024 as to the beginning of Moses. If Moses is a witness, that would point to him arriving at that time in 2024 and then completing his ministry when Israel is 80 years old, right? So that's really wonderful. And so if we have, again, we look at our rapture window, and if we have a midpoint on Hanukkah, that means we got a rapture window anytime this spring, summer. If we push this back to Passover 2028, then the rapture could be somewhere in the fall, like around the trumpets or whatever. But the cool thing about a Passover midpoint is Moses took them out on Passover. So that would just fit like a glove. That would fit so good if the midpoint was Passover for that reason. Because what happens is at Passover 2028, Israel is like so close to being 80 years old. It's like really close, like I think within a month or something. It's like their last possible thing for this theory to make sense. So, and Moses took them out with water, and then here we are in Revelation talking about water, and being saved from the waters, right? So let me just turn this camera around and do a little quick summary without these charts here. So a little recap without the charts. So cool that we've got Moses taking them out of Egypt, taking Israel out of Egypt when he was 80. We have Israel about to be 80 in 2028 if we use the most common date of 1948. Moses takes them out at 80. Moses takes them out to the wilderness at age 80. Moses comes back, this is the theory, as one of the witnesses and takes them out when Israel is 80 to the wilderness. 80 wilderness, 80 wilderness. Psalm 90 was likely written 7 cycles of 490 years ago, which is 3,430 years. That ties to the same time, the same year that Rahab would have been taken out of Jerusalem, or not Jerusalem, Jericho, 7 years before Israel divides up their land. Perfect. Love it. So cool. Very nice. And I showed in Acts how Moses was 80 and all of that. So one other thing too that I'm going to show in this video. One second. Let me get started. I did a video on a day is like 1,000 years, but also a day is like 1 year. A day is like, one day is 1 year when it comes to iniquity, when it comes to punishment. And the Strong's number is H5771. And that's a word for iniquity, but it's also a word for evil or sin or punishment. That is used in Ezekiel 4 verse 6 and also Numbers 14 verse 34. Both verses talking about a day for a year when it comes to punishment or iniquity. If you're disobedient to the Lord, you don't obey, or you don't have the faith, or you sin, the punishment is 1 day for 1 year. Okay? Now, the other verses, 2 Peter 3 verse 8 and Psalm 90 verse 4, which is a prophetic psalm. That's why Psalm 90 is a prophetic psalm, because it's talking about God's 7,000-year plan, spoken through Moses. But what we have here is 1 day is 1 year when it comes to punishment and rebellion. So there's lots of verses. I pinned it in one of my videos. Maybe I'll pin it below. But there's lots of verses in the book of Numbers and Leviticus when it's like, when you have leprosy, it's 7 days outside the camp. When you rebel, Miriam, when you rebel in Numbers chapter 12, you are 7 days outside the camp. If you touch a dead body, 7 days you're unclean. If you are going to be a priest, which we are, if we're in Revelation 1 verse 6, we're called priests, you need to be consecrated for 7 days, and that door can't be opened at any time. You got to stay in there. So there's always this 7 days, 7 days, 7 days, 7 days, 7 days, 7 days. But when it comes to rebellion, 7 days turns into 7 years. And so that's why we're waiting for the 7-year time of tribulation, because in the spiritual sense, Jacob or Israel has rebelled against Christ, their Messiah, which Moses spoke about. Isn't that something? So they are rebelling about what Moses prophesied about, which was Christ. Moses prophesied about Christ, and so Moses is going to come back. Maybe Moses in this theory will come back again, and like this time it's going to be like with fire. Like, you know, if you don't believe in Christ, you're toast. You're toast. And so, wouldn't that be so fitting for God to do it again? For Moses to bring them out to the wilderness again at the 80-year mark. That would be perfect. So my message to you as an individual, God came to save and he came to heal. Step 1, he wants you to get saved. He wants you to become born again. He wants you to believe in the cross. He wants you to understand that his blood is enough. Step 1, Romans 10:9 through 13. If you confess with your mouth and you believe in your heart that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, you shall be saved. What's next after that? If you get saved, now what? Getting saved is kind of like saying I do at a wedding. Now what? Well, you know, enter into a relationship with Jesus Christ. Allow him to heal your heart. Allow him to heal your brokenness. Okay? And that's a lifelong journey of a relationship with him, a relationship with his word, and a relationship with brothers and sisters in Christ. A lot of us making videos, we want people saved, but then we don't talk much more about what happens after that. So we want to engage with you. We want to have a relationship with you guys. We have a Discord where we can fellowship and grow together. So hop in the links below if you want to socialize with people. Let's say you're saved, but you have no clue about anything, or you don't know how to do life. You don't know how to understand the Bible. Well, that's the place to go to. And so I pray that you get saved, and then I pray that you allow God to heal your broken heart. Luke 4, 16 through 18, he kind of says 6 things of what he wants to do, but he wants to save you, but he also wants to heal you, okay? It's all about Jesus, man. Go, Jesus, go. Hope to see you in the clouds very soon. One day closer. Adios, muchachos.
Hallelujah, I'll see you in the rapture.